Hi everyone, today's session is the assignment discussion session, and the unit that we're doing is Principles of Criminal Law. M6509283 is the unit code. The unit that we'll be doing, as I've mentioned, is Criminal Law, and my name is Shazia Khan. And before I go into the assignment discussion session, I just want to give you an overview of what we did in the last 4 learning outcomes. So we've completed 4 learning outcomes. They will be they are recorded, and they are on Moodle for you to have a look at when it comes to doing your assignment discussion. So I'm just going to go through each learning outcome briefly, so you've got a bit of an idea of what we've done and a recap on what we've done in the learning outcomes. So the first learning outcome we've been through is learning outcome 1, which is to understand the principles of actus reus and mens rea requirements of criminal offences. We looked at the element of what actus reus is and what mens rea is in regards to criminal law. We also went on to looking at the definition again of what components are part of actus reus, and examples of actus reus is an element in murder, what the actus reus is and what the omissions are as well. We then went on to look at mens rea, the different levels of mens rea. So we looked at intention, recklessness, negligence, knowledge, with reference to the guilty mind, which is mens rea. We then looked at the case examples in regards to mens rea and actus rea, which was a popular case of R and Cunningham, 1957, and R and G and other, 2003. We also went on to look at in detail the requirements for actus reus. So we looked at actus reus, the guilty act, so elements of that conduct, circumstances and result with reference to case law. We also looked at voluntary and involuntary acts with reference to cases such as R and Mitchell, 1983, and Hill and Baxter, 1958. We went on to look in learning outcome 1 at liability for omissions, and looked at the case of Pitwood, 1902, and the case of Stone and Dobinson, 1977. We then went on to look at causation, and we looked at the but-for test in factual causation and legal causation. And for the factual causation, we looked at the case of R and White, 1910. And for legal causation, we looked at the case of R and Paget, 1983. We then went on to look at the element of breaking the chain of causation, and we looked at novus actus intervenus, which means intervening acts. We then went on to look at the requirements for mens rea. So we looked at actus rea, now we looked at the requirements for mens rea. We looked at the intention, so the direct intention with reference to a case R and Mohan, 1976, and oblique intention with reference to the case of R and Woollin, 1998. We looked at recklessness and the different types of recklessness, subjective and objective recklessness. We then went on to look at the proof of high degree of fault and strict liability of mens rea. We then went on to look at the relationship between actus reus and mens rea in regards to criminal cases. We looked at the concurrence principle, the complementary role, and the strict liability exception. We looked at examples of relationships in murder, theft, and arson with reference to actus and the mens in for all 3 elements. We looked at the nature of criminal conduct. We looked at the criminal conduct as an act against the state, and looked at crimes and the role of the state, enforcement of criminal law. We looked at the presumption of innocence and the standard of proof in criminal court in regards to why a high standard is necessary in criminal court, and gave examples. In learning outcome 1, we went through all the case law in all the elements of it. We then went on to learning outcome 2, and we looked at understanding the classification of violent offences in learning outcome 2. We looked at what the classification of offences in the UK are, the elements of understanding the classification of offences. We looked at the overview of violent offences, and we looked at the classification of violence offences such as homicide offences, murder, manslaughter, voluntary manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, and corporate manslaughter. We also looked at assault offences, common assault, ABH and GBH. We looked at sexual offences and what that meant and how it was governed under the Sexual Offences Act 2003. And we looked at public order offences, which was governed by the Public Order Act 1986. We looked at factors influencing classification and the legal framework and legislation in Learning Outcome 2. We then went on to look at the violent offences, and we looked at common law assault and battery, and we looked at offences against the person Act 1861 with Section 47, Section 20 and Section 18. We looked at homicide offences, murder, manslaughter and causation. And we looked at in causation, we looked at the thin skull rule with example of the Aaron Blow case and Aaron Paget and Aaron Cheshire. We then looked at the element of defences of loss of control and diminished responsibility. We looked at common law offence of murder, loss of self-control, and the case of Aaron Dawes, and qualifying triggers, the case of Aaron Clinton. We then went on to look at diminished responsibility with reference to the Aaron Bryan case. And we looked at the comparison of loss of control and diminished responsibility. We then went on to look at the analysis of actus reus and mens rea of common law offences against the person. We looked at common law offences against the person as in assault and battery with reference to cases, GBH and ABH, grievous bodily harm and actual bodily harm with reference to cases. We looked at the legislation on Coroners and Justice Act 2009 and looked at the discussion of the famous cases of Clinton 2012 and Dawes 2013. We looked at the actus reus and mens rea elements for murder, and we looked at the element of death of a human being, and we looked at the mens rea for murder. We also looked at cases such as Aaron Gibbons and Proctor, Aaron Cunningham and Aaron Blow. Then we went on to Learning Outcome 3. In Learning Outcome 3, we looked at understanding the legal liability requirements for criminal damage and theft. We looked at what criminal liability actually means with reference to criminal damage, and we looked at the Criminal Damage Act 1971. We also looked at the criminal damage with reference to actus reus and mens res. We looked at the aggravated criminal damage in reference to Learning Outcome 3. We also looked at theft, the actus, appropriation, property and belonging to another. We looked at mens rea, which is dishonesty and intention to deprive. We looked at cases such as Aaron Gosh and IFA and Genting Casinos 2017 and Aaron Vemelin. We went on to look at definitions of criminal damage, aggravated criminal damage and theft. We looked at key elements, which was destruction or damage, endangerment to life. We then went on to look at mens rea with reference to intention to create any recklessness. We then went on to look at theft with reference to the Theft Act 1968, and key elements of that was appropriation, property and belonging to another. We also looked at mens rea and looked at dishonesty, intention to permanently deprive, and with reference to cases as well. We looked at defences under Criminal Damage Act 1971, which was Section 5 and belief in consent and belief in protection of property. We then went on to look at defences, key defences to criminal law, which was appropriation, with the reference to the case of Aaron Gomez, 1993, dishonesty with reference to the case of Gosh, 1982, and the case of Ivy, 2017, and Barton and Booth, VR, 2020. We looked at the element of analysis of actus reus in Learning Outcome 3 and mens rea and elements of criminal damage. We also looked at the Guilty Act in the actus reus and looked at the case of Rowe and Kingerley, 1986. And we looked at the case of Turner, number 2, 1971. We also went to look at the element of without lawful excuse, which was the case of Jaggard and Dickinson, 1981, and application of actus reus and mens res. We also looked at case examples with reference to actus and mens, and also looked at elements of analysis of actus reus and mens rea, elements of theft. We looked at key elements of actus reus, appropriation under Section 3, Case examples Gomez and Aaron Hinks. We also looked at mens rea of theft, cases such as Aaron Barton Booth, and also looked at dishonesty, section 2. We went to look at intention to permanently deprive, section 6 as well, and application of actus and mens rea. So that was learning outcome 3. Now in learning outcome 4, the final learning outcome, we looked at understanding the general defences to criminal conduct. We looked at the type of general criminal defences in the UK. And we looked at elements of automatism, intoxication, and looked at elements of mistake as well. We looked at understanding the general defences. So we looked at general defences to criminal conduct, self-defence, legal basis, key elements and cases such as Aaron Gladstone, Williams and Aaron Martin. We looked at duress and insanity with reference to elements of actus and mens, and we looked at cases such as Aaron Hassan, Aaron Ho and Aaron Sullivan. We looked at automatism and intoxication with reference to key cases. We also looked at mistake and how that was a defence in criminal law. And we looked at the element of definitions of intoxication, duress, and strict liability. We then went on to look at voluntary intoxication and looked at the case of DPP and Magistics, 1976, and Aaron Gallagher, 1963. We looked at involuntary intoxication and classification of offences. We looked at duress, strict liability, and looked at elements of circumstances in which intoxication can provide a defence. We looked at types of intoxication and applicability, so things like specific intent of offences and basic intent offences. We looked at involuntary intoxication in reference to learning outcome 4. We looked at classification of offences and intoxication and exceptions and practical considerations. We then went on to look at circumstances in which duress can provide a defence, duress by threat, duress by circumstances, key elements, immediacy of the threat, such as the case of Aaron Abdul Hussein, 1999, seriousness of the threat in reference to the case of Aaron Valderrama, Vegan, 1985, and proportionality of the offence. We looked at no safe avenue of escape, Aaron Gill, 1963. We went on to look at voluntary association in the case of Aaron Hassan and threat directed at the defendants. We looked at crimes excluded from duress, such as murder and attempted murder, terrorism-related offences. We looked at duress by circumstances and looked at the case of Aaron Conway. We also went to look at conditions for duress to succeed. We looked at duress cases involving threats of death or serious injury, and we looked at really famous cases of R.E. Re 2000, which is necessity as a defence, and R.V. Dudley and Stevens, 1884. We also went to look at another case, which was Aaron Pommel, 1985, which was duress by circumstances, and Piper versus DPP 2012, a driving under duress. We then went to look at mistake as a defence in criminal law and looked at the types of mistakes, so mistake of fact or mistake of law. For the defence to succeed, the mistake must be honest. We looked at the case of Aaron Smith, 1974, and DPP and Morgan, 1976. Then we looked at mistake of law and looked at the case of Aaron Aesop, 1836. We looked at mistake and type of offences, and we looked at the key cases. We looked at 4.5, the final one, in analysis of defence of self or others or property. We looked at self-defence in criminal law. We looked at proportionality, prevention of crime, defence of property, limitations of self-defence. We also looked at strict liability in criminal law. So key features: no mens rea requirement, public welfare, limited defence, the case of Sweet and Paisley, and the case of London Borough of Harrow and Shah, 1999. We also looked at elements of proportionality and application with reference to self-defense and strict liability. So them are the elements that we've looked at in learning outcome 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I've just given you a quick recap of what we've done in each learning outcome. Each learning outcome is recorded and is on Moodle for you to have a look at in your own time. So we're just going to go to the assignment discussion now, okay? So the assignment, the unit aim is to introduce the concepts of, sorry, just in that case. So in the it's to introduce the students to concepts of criminal law, including liability, offences and defences. The unit builds on foundations of criminal law, actus reus and mens res. It will also investigate the areas of non-fatal and fatal offences, theft, criminal damage and defences. Students will also research the key cases and common law precedents that came out of these cases. So again, going on to the learning outcomes, there's 4 learning outcomes. Learning outcome 1, it was to understand the principles of actus reus and mens rea requirement of criminal offences. Secondly, is to understand the classification of violent offences. And learning outcome 3 is to understand the legal liability requirements for criminal damage and theft. And learning outcome 4 is to understand the general defences, which we went through earlier. Assignment declaration. So this again is really important when it comes to doing your assignment. You need to make sure, and I'll bring this up now, so you've got a little bit of an idea of what to do. So you need to make sure that you sign this declaration. I'll just increase the size so you can see that this declaration needs your name, your student name, and your student number, and your course on there as well, assignment details as well. So this is to confirm that you have read the centre's policy on plagiarism and guidance on plagiarism, and you have not copied any of the work. You have ticked that you clearly referenced in both the text and the bibliography or references all sources used in the work. You need to make sure you are referencing using the Harvard system of referencing. You have fully referenced and used inverted commas or all text quoted from books, journals or websites, provided the sources of tables for figures that are not your own work, and not made the use of any other student's work, which is collusion or any copying, okay? And you've not sought any sort of agencies, essay.com or anything, you haven't bought any essays, and you understand that any false claim in respect of the work will result in any sort of disciplinary action and in accordance with the college's regulations. So you have declared that and you have signed that, okay, so that you have made sure that you've read the college's policy on plagiarism and you've not copied any of the work, and all the work you've submitted is your own work and you've referenced all the work. That is so important, and I'll reiterate this every time I'm going through these slides, that it's really, really important that the work you submit and the work you produce is your own work. The assignment declaration is available at that link there, which you have to submit this with the assignment when you submit it at the start. So you need to make sure you are on top of things when it comes to declaring that the work is yours. You're using your referencing and you avoid using AI. Okay, and we'll go through that in more detail throughout. Okay. So what information needs to go on the assignment? So you need to have your name, as we mentioned, your registration number, your tutor's name, if possible. Word count for this assignment is 2,500, and the date of submission. So when you submitted the assignment, okay? So after this session, you have 2 weeks to submit the assignment. So you need to put the date of the submission. Unit level, which in this case is level 3, Principles of Criminal Law, and you need to submit the work on learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk. Again, going through plagiarism and collusion, which is really important. You need to make sure that the work you submit and complete is your own work, okay? Plagiarism is presenting the thoughts, ideas, and words of another person as if they were your own work. Collusion may occur when students' assignments are very similar. In some cases, they are identical and that of another fellow student. So you need to make sure you are not copying any other student's work. This amounts to plagiarism, okay? And plagiarism is taken seriously, and the students are strongly recommended to refer to the academic misconduct policy, which is available on Moodle, which is the virtual learning environment that we use for UK Varsity. So at the start of the assignment, you need a table of contents, okay? A font size, it needs to be 12. You need to have 1.5 line spacing, so it's easy for the assessor to mark it. And page numbers need to be inserted so that you could put that in the table of contents. Needs to be in Microsoft Word format, not Google. So you need to make sure that you are not using Google format to submit your assignment or to do your assignment. And if you do not have access to MS Word format, there's a link there that I've put there, which provides WPS Office, and you download that and it's free and you can do your work on there. You need to make sure you are not submitting work via Google, okay? You need at the start of the assignment an introduction. And your word count needs to be 2,500 words, and make sure you are putting the assessment criteria in the headings. Make sure that when you are looking at what the question is asking you, the tasks, you need to make sure that you are looking at the element of what you need to do in that task. General information. So this is just about the unit which is being taught and delivered at UK Varsity, and it's the VLE that is used is Moodle, and handouts and any sort of additional reading, any sort of the recorded lectures are all available on Moodle for you. And that is the virtual learning environment where the course material is all available. There's also additional reading on there that you can refer to in your own time, that you need. Your assignment brief is on there, your learning outcomes are on there with reference to recorded sessions, your assignment brief is on there, your module specification is in Moodle. All your resources that you need to complete your assignment are available for you on Moodle. So let's go into the tasks. So the first task, there's 2 tasks. So task 1 of 2. Task 1 of 2 is AC 1.1 to 1.6, AC 2.1 to 2.7, and AC 4.1 to 4.7. Here you will be able to understand the ATHE and mens rea requirements of criminal offences. You need to explain the classification of violent offences, and you need to summarise general defences to criminal conduct. Assignment guidance. It's a scenario, okay? It is the World Cup final and Josh and Amir are watching the match at a local pub. When one of the team misses a goal, Amir becomes very angry. He has been drinking alcohol all morning. Josh is laughing at how much Amir is upset by the missed goal. Amir shouts at Josh, making him feel afraid. He throws a bottle and misses Amir and hits Rai, who is just sat behind him. Rai falls off her chair and hits her arm on the table. Her arm is very fragile as she's recently had an operation on it, and her arm breaks and she has to spend the next few weeks in hospital. So here you must advise them of this, okay? You must show knowledge and understanding of the subject area. You must provide references to the relevant cases or legislation wherever appropriate, and you must be able to support your answer and show evidence of wider reading appropriately. So in this scenario, okay, so you need to identify the actus reus and the mens res of criminal offence, okay? So what is the actus reus? What's the mens res? So you need to identify which is the guilty act and which is the guilty mind. For example, if you look at Amir, the actus reus could be throwing the bottle that caused harm, even though it missed him and hit Rai. The mens rea would depend on whether Amir threw the bottle intentionally or recklessly. If he threw the bottle angrily at Josh, this could indicate an intention or reckless, which means that Amir may have required mens rea for an offence. You would look at the actus and the mens in regards to in Amir's case. In regards to the classification of offences, so what offences would matter here, you would, in Amir's situation, you might lead to violent offence based on classified under the law. So it might be assault, okay? And this is where if Amir shouts at Josh and causes him to feel afraid, it might amount to assault. In criminal law, assault can occur if a person intentionally or recklessly causes another to fear immediate unlawful violence. Here, the actus reus in Amir's action was shouting at angrily at Josh, and means the mens rea intent or recklessness to cause fear or harm. Now, if you look at the element of battery in this case, this could occur if Amir had made physical contact with Josh. But in this case, obviously, he didn't make physical contact. And shoving or hitting him would be an example. But in this case, that doesn't appear to be physical contact, or battery would not apply unless something physical happened between them. Again, GBH and ABH, Amir's throwing of the bottle that accidentally hit Rai could lead to a charge of causing actual bodily harm, which is ABH, or grievous bodily harm, depending on the severity of Rai's injury. If the bottle was thrown recklessly, it could lead to a charge of recklessness causing injury. If the injury was caused with the intent to harm, the mens rea would be intentional. Now, in reference to criminal negligence, if Amir was aware of the risk that his actions could harm others but still choose to throw the bottle, he could be charged with causing injury by criminal negligence, especially given that Rai's arm was fragile from her, having the recent operation. In regard Sorry about that.